In this episode, we're delving into the Rambam's ninth principle of faith, which asserts the unchanging nature of the Torah's teachings, both written and oral. We'll uncover the foundation of this belief, rooted in sacred verses and enriched by rabbinic insights. We'll examine the significance of Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 2, and chapter 13, verse 1, where the prohibition against altering the Torah's commandments is emphasized. Our exploration, of course, does not stop there. We'll dive into the innovative mind of the Maharal of Prague, who bridged Jewish tradition and emerging ideas in a very unique way. Stay tuned as we address thought-provoking objections from Christian scholars who challenge the immutability of the Torah. We'll navigate through script changes, authority concerns, and calligraphic embellishments, all while exploring the essence of unchanging Torah truth. The Rambam's ninth principle of faith focuses on the immutability of the Torah, asserting that the teachings of the Torah, both written and oral, are unchanging and cannot be altered by human beings. This principle is rooted in several verses from the Torah and is further elaborated upon by various rabbinic sources, as we will see. Let's delve into key aspects of this principle and understand its significance. The ninth principle draws its foundation from two verses found in the book of Deuteronomy. The first, Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 2, states, "You shall not add to the thing which I command you, and you shall not subtract from it, that you may guard the commandments of the Lord your God, which I command you." This verse emphasizes the prohibition against introducing additional commandments or subtracting from existing ones. The second verse, Deuteronomy chapter 13, verse 1, echoes the statement, declaring the entire thing which I command you, you shall guard it in order to keep it. You may not add to it nor subtract from it. Rabbinic commentary further elucidates the principle's meaning. Rashi provides examples of what constitutes adding to the Torah, such as incorporating extra sections into a pair of tefillin, or adding species to the lulav, which is used during the festival of Sukkot. There are supposed to be 4 species. Adding a fifth species would invalidate the lulav. These examples highlight that the Torah's instructions are to be followed precisely and without modification. A Talmudic text, the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, page 28b, raises a question about whether a priest can add his own blessings during a ritual. Right? We have the priestly blessing. Now imagine for a second that one of the Kohanim would say, well, since the Torah authorized me to give this blessing to begin with, I'll add a little extra of my own. So the conclusion over there is that that is impossible. There are only 3 blessings in the blessings of the Kohanim, and a fourth one would be essentially a transgression of the prohibition against adding to the Torah. And this response refers back to the verses that we just quoted in Deuteronomy and reinforces the idea that one must not add new elements to the Torah's commandments. Now, let's turn to the commentary of Rabbi Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, who's also known by the acronym Netziv. He lived in the 19th century from 1816 to 1893. Very prominent Orthodox rabbi, educator, and leader during the 19th century. He was born in the town of Mir, which was in Russia. It's now in Belarus. That's the town that gives its name to the famous yeshivas Mir that exists in both the United States and in Israel to this day. There's a story about the Netziv that when he was a young student, he struggled with his studies and did not show immediate signs of exceptional scholarly aptitude. So his teacher, seeing his difficulty, advised his parents to consider preparing him for a trade like a tailor or a shoemaker, and he didn't seem to possess the qualities of a future Torah scholar. But the Nitziv's parents were committed to his education and to his potential. They recognized his determination and his drive, and they supported his learning despite the initial challenges he faced. Over time, the Nitziv's diligence and dedication to his studies became apparent, and he eventually blossomed into a brilliant and influential Torah scholar. He became the head of the Volozhin Yeshiva, which was the first of the yeshivas that we recognize by that structure of an educational institution. And it, of course, was one of the most prestigious yeshivas of that time. He emphasized the importance of combining rigorous Talmudic study with ethical teachings. He was also a staunch defender of traditional Jewish education and values in the face of modernizing trends. He was the author of several works, including Ha'emek Davar, which is what we're going to be quoting this evening. It's a commentary on the Torah, offering insightful and very profound interpretations. His teachings highlight the interconnectedness of the written and oral Torah, and they underscore the moral and ethical principles embedded within Jewish law. Throughout his life, the Netziv advocated for the preservation of Jewish tradition while acknowledging the need for adapting to changing circumstances. This is very portentous because that's exactly what we're going to be dealing with this entire evening. The Netziv clarifies that when we look at the verses from Deuteronomy, the thing that is being commanded refers to the oral Torah. The term thing in the Hebrew is davar. Now, davar has the Hebrew root daled vet resh, which can mean thing, but it also can mean to speak, as in lidaber. So, according to the Netziv, when Moses refers to the thing which we are commanded, he's referring to the oral Torah. He's understanding that davar is being used in the sense of to speak. The oral Torah, as we know, encompasses the interpretation and explanations of the written Torah, which ensures that its commandments are correctly understood and followed. And then we have the Maharal of Prague, who lived in the 16th century. This is Rabbi Yehuda Loewy ben Betzalel, who was known as the Maharal of Prague. He was a brilliant Talmudic scholar, philosopher, and mystic. He was born in Poland, but he served as the chief rabbi of Prague after his father, and became a central figure in Jewish intellectual life during the Renaissance period. The Maharal is renowned for his profound and innovative approach to Jewish thought. He wrote extensively on Jewish ethics, philosophy, and mysticism, seeking to bridge the gap between Jewish tradition and the emerging ideas of his time. One of his most famous creations, we know through the legend of the Golem of Prague, which, if nothing else, illustrates his deep engagement with both Jewish mysticism and ethical concerns. We'll talk about the Golem some other time. His magnum opus was Netzach Yisrael, which speaks of Jewish ethics, national destiny of the Jewish people, and the interconnectedness of the spiritual and material realms. Dealing with the idea of the oral Torah, adding rabbinic fences around commandments. Why does that happen? It happens in order to prevent people from transgressing actual biblical commandments. It's protection against transgression, and it is not meant to add to the actual commandments themselves. What we're talking about is stringencies that keep a person, let's say, what we would say in the United States, where there's a fire, keep 200 feet back. So his understanding is that while rabbinic decrees serve as protective measures, they're not considered adding to the Torah. They're not in violation of this principle. Also, if you look in the Rambam's own commentary on the Mishnah, he expands upon it, clarifying that the prohibition against adding or subtracting applies to both the written and the oral Torah, and that this principle safeguards the trustworthiness of the transmission of the Torah over the generations. That is ultimately why this particular principle of faith is important, because we know that the Torah that we have in our hands today is the Torah that was revealed on Mount Sinai. The Vilna Gaon brings a unique perspective by connecting the number of commandments, 613, to the human body's organs, meaning we have a kind of spiritual anatomy that corresponds to our physical anatomy. When we add or subtract commandments, what we're implying is that there must be a spiritual deficiency in the person's spiritual anatomy, right? If there are 613 commandments in total, there are 248 positive commandments, which correspond to the 248 limbs of the body. If you're going to add another commandment, you're going to have a commandment that does not correspond to a part of spiritual anatomy. So in other words, you will render the person who is observing the Torah essentially deficient in one part. We also find this principle in the liturgy as well. In the Siddur, we see after the morning service a declaration of faith in the Ani Mamins, which underscores the belief that the Torah will not be replaced or exchanged for another. And we also see that in the Yigdal hymn, where it says that God will not ever exchange the Torah for another. Now, some Christian scholars have raised objections to this principle. I saw these listed on a site called Hebrew for Christians. I don't suggest you visit the site. It's stated there outright that the belief in the immutability of the Torah is an incorrect belief held by the Jews. And they question the dogma of the immutability of the Torah as presented by the Rambam. They point out that the original script of the Torah was not the square script, the Ktav Ashurit, that has been preserved over the centuries by the Sofrim, by the scribes, but rather Ktav Ivri, an earlier script that resembles more the ancient Phoenician script. The Talmud itself acknowledges that the script changed over time, and it was Ezra who introduced the Ashurit script. This change, they argued, represents a real alteration of the Torah, contrary to the belief in its unchangeable nature. Furthermore, they raised the question of the authority by which Ezra translated the Torah into Ktav Ashurit. This translation, they assert, seems to go against the commandment given by Moses in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 2, "You shall not add to the word that I command you, nor take from it." They argue that the transliteration of ancient Hebrew script into Aramaic represents a significant change in the Torah itself. And moreover, they question the calligraphic embellishments of the Sokra. We have on top of letters something that is referred to as tagim, crowns. And there are mystical speculations of Kabbalists about them. So is this form of embellishment somehow a violation of the absolute preservation of the Torah's original form? That's what they suggest. In addition, these Christian scholars point out that historical circumstances led to changes in the Torah's application, and they cite examples like Moses changing instructions regarding the Passover observance and the alteration of dietary laws as evidence that the Torah has been subject to change based on changing circumstances. They also reference instances where certain laws were annulled after the Israelites took possession of the land, suggesting that the Torah's applicability can change based on historical events. These Christian objections challenge the notion of the immutable Torah and suggest that the Torah has undergone changes throughout history, both in terms of script and application, contrary to the ninth principle. The ninth principle of faith is a hard one for them. Their perspective questions the absolute unchangeability of the Torah and raises complex theological and historical considerations. Now, you gotta love it when people like this make it sound as if they know something that all of our sages somehow missed. Like they found sources that even the Rambam didn't know about. Here, I've got some sources, Mr. Rambam, but, I'm sure that the author of this particular post is a well-meaning guy. I'm also sure that his expertise in Torah and Judaism doesn't come within 500 light years of the Rambam's. But if we need to answer the charges, here goes. With regard to changes in the Hebrew script and Ezra's transliteration, again, the argument is made that the original script of the Torah was not in the square script, the Ketav Ashurit that we have today, but it was in Ketav Ivri, and that Ezra's transliteration represents a real change in the Torah itself. But it's important to note that changes in script or transliteration do not necessarily change the content or meaning of the Torah. The switch from Ketav Ivri to Ketav Ashurit could be seen as a practical adaptation to the changing linguistic landscape and to make the text more accessible to the Jewish community of the time. This change in script does not alter the actual words, laws, or principles of the Torah. With regard to Tagin and the changes of the Sofrim, it's supposed to raise suspicion about the sanctity of the text, but the Tagin are ornamental embellishments, and they're not changes to the content or meaning of the text. They may have mystical significance. They're there to enhance the beauty of the written Torah, and their presence does not impact the fundamental teachings and laws of the Torah. The idea that the Torah is going to change during the Messianic age, there are opinions like that amongst the sages, that certain commandments will be nullified in the Messianic age. That might suggest changes in emphasis or application, but nevertheless, it's understood that the core principles of the Torah's ethical and moral teachings will remain constant. There are arguments that Judaism made adaptations after the destruction of the Second Temple by changing the mode of worship. They went from a sacrificial system to a prayer system. First of all, that's not true. There was always a prayer system. The sacrificial system is only possible when we have a temple. But even when we do not have the ability to bring sacrifices, the prayers are arranged to accord with the sacrificial times, and it doesn't necessarily imply a change in the essence of the Torah itself. It's a response, again, to historical circumstances rather than a deliberate modification of the Torah's teachings. The concept of rabbinic authority has been a point of discussion and contention, especially when it comes to the immutability of the Torah. Detractors of the principle of Torah immutability often highlight instances where rabbinic decrees appear to introduce changes to the observance of certain commandments. They argue that if rabbinic authorities possess the power to enact new regulations, then the Torah itself cannot be truly immutable. The point of disagreement lies in the interpretation of what constitutes a change to the Torah. Detractors may argue that any modification or addition, even if implemented by rabbinic authorities, implies a change to the Torah's immutable nature. On the other hand, those who believe in the ninth principle, which is a key principle of faith, assert that the Torah's core teachings, its ethical and moral values, and the foundational precepts that guide human behavior are the aspects that remain immutable. Rabbinic decrees serve as a means of upholding and applying these principles in the face of evolving circumstances, but the core principles remain fixed and unchanged. If we look at the Rambam's explanation of the mitzvot on Deuteronomy chapter 13, verse 1, in light of the authority held by a court of law, by a Beit Din, to enact decrees and prohibitions, even regarding what's permissible, to forbid what's permissible, for example, or to sustain these prohibitions for generations. And since they are also empowered to temporarily permit certain Torah prohibitions based on emergency situations, like emergency authorizations, we have to consider the true meaning of the Torah's caution against adding to or subtracting from its teachings. The essence of this warning is to ensure that we do not add new content to the actual words of the Torah, nor detract from its existing content. It stands as a directive to firmly establish the eternal essence of Torah, whether it pertains to the written Torah or the oral Torah. While a court of law possesses the capacity to enact, prohibit, temporarily permit the integrity of the Torah's teachings, must remain unaltered. This principle safeguards the foundational teachings of the Torah, while recognizing the authority granted to courts to apply its precepts within the bounds of necessity and context. The Maharal offers a profound insight into why rabbinic decrees do not violate the prohibition against adding or subtracting from the Torah. To comprehend this concept, it's crucial to consider the authority vested in the Beit Din, which is a body that possesses the power to enact prohibitions. We are prompted to delve into the deeper meaning of the Torah's admonition against adding to or subtracting from its teachings. The essence of this cautionary statement lies in the preservation of the Torah's original content, just like we said before. So we have the written Torah, to which this principle applies, and of course the oral Torah, which encompasses the interpretations and the explanations of the written word. And yet, we know the Beit Din still has the power to permit, to forbid, to enact. So how do we resolve this seeming disparity? The Maharal's insight offers a reconciliation. Despite a Beit Din's capacity to enact, prohibit, or temporarily permit certain practices, the court's actions do not compromise the integrity of the Torah. Instead, these actions stem from a recognition of the Torah's timeless ethical and moral principles while acknowledging the dynamic nature of their application. That is the whole occupation of contemporary halakha, is to understand how Torah law applies with changing circumstances. The authority granted to the court enables them to adapt the application of these principles to suit the evolving needs of society and the exigencies of different historical moments. The Maharal's explanation is in alignment with the Rambam's perspective on the matter. Both the Maharal and the Rambam emphasize the court's authority to enact and uphold decrees, even on matters that are otherwise permissible according to the Torah. This authority extends to sustaining these prohibitions for future generations, and when necessary, temporarily permitting certain prohibitions based on contextual needs. Both the Maharal and Rambam address the core intention of the Torah's caution against adding to or subtracting from its teachings. It has to do with the integrity of the Torah's content. The Torah's instruction seeks to maintain the purity of its teachings by preventing the introduction of new content or the omission of existing material from its words. And what's interesting is that the verse in Deuteronomy chapter 13, verse 1, which again tells us not to add or subtract, is immediately followed by a section dealing with what happens if a false prophet arises and tells us to do something else. And that is what has happened, of course, throughout history. We have to always go back to that principle that this thing isn't changing. It's not like, okay, God reveals himself at Mount Sinai. Here is the blueprint of creation, which contains instructions for all of humanity, 613 mitzvot for the Jewish people, 7 mitzvot for the Bnei Noach, and Oh, never mind. Here's another testament. I mean, please. It goes against everything anybody believes about God. And here's another point, which should vaporize the whole objection to rabbinic authority. If we look in Deuteronomy chapter 17, verses 8 through 12, we have a biblical source for the concept of rabbinic authority. This passage outlines the establishment of a legal system, including the appointment of judges and magistrates to resolve disputes and interpret and apply the law. Here's an overview of the passage and its implications for rabbinic authority. When a matter is too baffling for you to decide, be it a controversy over homicide, civil law, or assault, matters of dispute in your courts, you shall promptly repair to the place that the Lord your God will have chosen and appear before the Levitical priests or the magistrate in charge at the time and present your problem. When they've announced to you the verdict in the case, you shall carry out the verdict that is announced to you from that place that the Lord chose, that's the Beit HaMikdash, the temple, observing scrupulously all their instructions to you. Observing scrupulously all their instructions to you. That's oral law. You shall act in accordance with the instructions given you and the ruling handed down to you. You must not deviate from the verdict that they announced to you, either to the right or to the left. If a man presumes to disobey the priest charged with serving there the Lord your God or the magistrate, that man shall die. Thus you will sweep out evil from Israel. Case closed. Wrapping up our exploration of the Torah being the immutable word of God, let's remember that the Torah's wisdom is not confined to the past. It's as relevant today as it was in the moment of its revelation. Just as a sturdy foundation supports a timeless building, the Torah provides an enduring foundation for our lives. Its teachings, like a constant North Star, guide us through the ever-changing landscape of existence. So as we move forward, let's embrace the enduring relevance of the Torah. Let's find solace in its unchanging truths and draw inspiration from its eternal guidance. The Torah is not a relic of history. It's a living compass that will accompany us into the future, lighting our way with unwavering brilliance.